In Korean entertainment, an A-list actor is not just someone who is famous. He is the kind of star whose name alone can sell a drama, dominate headlines, shape public taste, and remain powerful across years, genres, and generations. Real A-list status is not built on one hit. It is built on longevity, influence, and the feeling that the industry itself moves differently when that actor returns. And when we talk about Korean male actors who still carry that level of power right now, three names immediately rise above the rest: Lee Min-ho, Hyun Bin, and Gong Yoo. Lee Min-ho remains one of the most recognizable Hallyu faces in the world, with When the Stars Gossip in 2025 and the big-budget fantasy film Omniscient Reader, the prophecy reinforcing his visibility. Hyun Bin continues to project elite star power through Harbin and the Disney Plus Hallyu series Made in Korea in 2025 to 2026. And Gong Yoo still holds a rare kind of prestige, with his long-running global recognition from Squid Game and fresh momentum through Netflix's upcoming 2026 period drama show business. But among these three, who truly feels like the most powerful and famous Korean A-list actor right now? Ban Ko Mon Min Viet Tiep. Part 2. What makes this ranking so interesting is that Lee Min-ho, Hyun Bin, and Gong Yoo do not project A-list power in the same way at all. Lee Min-ho represents global Hallyu scale, the kind of fame that travels fast, stays visible for years, and remains commercially powerful even when public opinion is divided on a project. That was obvious again with When the Stars Gossip in 2025 and the attention around Omniscient Reader, the prophecy, which kept his name circulating in both drama and blockbuster conversations. Hyun Bin represents elite star authority. His image feels colder, more polished, and more controlled, the kind of stardom built not just on popularity but on prestige, high-budget projects, and the feeling that every comeback is an event. That image stayed strong through Harbin and then Made in Korea, which premiered on December 24, 2025 on Disney Plus and Hulu. And Gong Yoo represents something even rarer: prestige mixed with lasting public affection. His global visibility remains tied to major international titles like Squid Game, where Netflix still highlights him as the recruiter, while new attention has been building around Netflix's upcoming show business in 2026. And that is exactly why this is not just a ranking about who is handsome, who had the biggest drama once, or who has the loudest fandom. Because an A-list actor is measured by something deeper. He must have name power strong enough to command attention before a project even airs. He must have industry weight strong enough that his return feels important. He must have public recognition broad enough to cross generations and markets. And most importantly, he must have the kind of star identity that survives trends instead of depending on them. So for this ranking, we are judging them through 4 layers. First, there is fame. How widely recognized and talked about they still are right now. Second, there is power. How much weight their name carries in the industry and with audiences. Third, there is longevity, whether their status feels temporary or deeply established. And finally, there is current relevance, who still feels dominant in the present, not just legendary in the past. That is why this top 3 works so well. Lee Min-ho represents worldwide fame. Hyun Bin represents elite A-list authority. And Gong Yoo represents prestige with emotional staying power. And when those 3 forms of stardom collide, the ranking becomes very hard to ignore. If there is one actor in this ranking who feels almost impossible to separate from the idea of global Korean stardom, it is Lee Min-ho. What makes Lee Min-ho so powerful is that his fame does not behave like ordinary actor popularity. It feels bigger than any one project, bigger than any one season, bigger even than whether a specific drama succeeds or fails. That is the clearest sign of real A-list power. The name itself becomes the event. And with Lee Min-ho, that has been true for years. His image is not just that of a successful actor. It is that of a Hallyu symbol, one of the faces people instinctively associate with Korean drama fame around the world. And that kind of recognition matters enormously in a ranking like this, because A-list power is not only about acting credits, it is about scale. It is about how much attention follows an actor automatically, before the audience has even decided whether the project is good. Lee Min-ho has that kind of gravity. In 2025, he stayed highly visible through When the Stars Gossip, and even though the drama drew mixed to negative reactions, his name remained at the center of the conversation. That is important, because true star power reveals itself most clearly when the project itself is contested, yet the actor's visibility remains untouched. What makes him even harder to ignore is that his relevance did not stop with television. Lee Min-ho also stayed in blockbuster conversation through Omniscient Reader, The Prophecy, a fantasy action film that drew strong public attention, and according to entertainment coverage, even dominated the Korean box office, despite broader questions about overall profitability. That tells us something very specific about his position. He is not just a drama star living off nostalgia. He is still powerful enough to anchor major commercial attention in the present. In other words, his fame is not a memory. It is still active. That is where Lee Min-ho becomes especially formidable in a top 3 like this. Because among Korean male stars, very few have managed to maintain such a large public identity for so long while continuing to move between different kinds of high-visibility projects. There are actors with stronger critical prestige. There are actors with colder, more elite screen authority. But Lee Min-ho has something uniquely difficult to manufacture: global recognizability that feels effortless. His face is familiar not only to committed K-drama viewers, but to casual international audiences who may know only a handful of Korean actors at all. That degree of recognition is a form of power all by itself. And yet, what makes his place in this ranking interesting is that his power is not exactly the same as Hyun Bin's or Gong Yoo's. Lee Min-ho feels broader, louder, and more openly tied to the machinery of Hallyu fame. He represents the kind of stardom that spreads outward fast and stays visible through sheer name value. He is the actor whose comeback can dominate headlines simply because it is his comeback. He does not need to be the most critically praised man in the room to be the most instantly famous one. And when a star reaches that point, he stops functioning only as an actor. He becomes an entertainment force. That is why Lee Min-ho is such a serious contender in this ranking. He represents Korean A-list fame at its most internationally recognizable, vast, durable, commercially magnetic, and powerful enough to survive fluctuations in the projects around him. In a conversation about who is most famous and powerful right now, leaving him out would be almost impossible. But if Lee Min-ho represents worldwide scale, the next actor represents something colder, more elite, and in some ways even harder to challenge. If Lee Min-ho represents worldwide scale, then Hyun Bin represents something colder, rarer, and in some ways even more powerful: elite A-list authority. What makes Hyun Bin so formidable is that his stardom does not feel noisy. It feels controlled. He is not the kind of actor who needs constant visibility to remind people of his importance. His power works differently. It comes from the sense that every time he returns, the industry pays attention in a more serious way. His image carries polish, discipline, and an almost intimidating level of command. That is a very specific kind of celebrity force, and it is one of the reasons Hyun Bin has remained so hard to challenge at the top. Because with Hyun Bin, fame is never just about public affection. It is also about weight. He has the kind of star identity that immediately makes a project feel bigger, more expensive, and more important. Even before people decide whether they love the role, they already understand the scale of the casting. That is one of the clearest markers of a true A-list actor. The name itself raises expectations. Hyun Bin has that effect, and he has had it for years. His career has moved far beyond ordinary popularity into something more durable, a level of recognition where he feels less like a trend and more like a fixture of Korean top-tier stardom. What makes him especially strong in this ranking is that his current relevance is still very real. After Harbin reinforced his image through a major historical thriller collaboration, Hyun stayed at the center of high-profile conversation through Made in Korea, the period political crime action series that premiered on December 24, 2025 on Disney Plus and Hulu. The series stars Hyun in one of the two lead rival roles, and its scale is clear not only from the platform rollout, but also from the fact that a second season had already entered production before the first season even finished its run. That tells you a lot about where Hyun still stands. He is not simply attached to prestige projects. He is attached to projects built like events, and that is where Hyun becomes different from Lee Min-ho. Lee Min-ho feels broader, more openly tied to worldwide Hallyu recognition. Hyun feels more elite, more selective, more like the actor whose name signals quality, gravity, and high-level star status rather than pure scale alone. His fame may not always feel as loud, but it feels denser, more concentrated. And in the long run, that kind of authority can be just as powerful as mass popularity, sometimes even more so. That is why Hyun is such a serious contender in this ranking. He represents Korean A-list stardom at its most polished, controlled, prestigious, and powerful enough that every comeback carries the energy of a major event. He does not simply remain famous. He remains important. And in an industry where fame can fluctuate fast, that kind of stability is one of the strongest forms of power an actor can have. But if Hyun represents elite authority, the next actor represents something even harder to classify. A mix of prestige, affection, and cultural staying power that almost no one else can replicate. If Lee Min-ho represents worldwide Hallyu scale, and Hyun represents elite A-list authority, then Gong Yoo represents something even rarer, prestige with emotional staying power. What makes Gong Yoo so powerful is that his fame has never felt ordinary. It does not move like trending popularity, and it does not depend on constant exposure. Instead, it carries the feeling of weight, the kind of stardom built through performances that linger in public memory for years. He is one of those actors whose name immediately suggests quality, presence, and a kind of almost untouchable screen charisma. That alone would be enough to keep him in the A-list conversation. But what makes him especially formidable right now is that his relevance still stretches across both prestige and mass recognition. Because Gong Yoo is not just respected, he is remembered. And in Korean entertainment, that distinction matters more than people think. A lot of famous actors dominate one era and then slowly become symbols of a past peak. Gong Yoo does not feel like that. He feels like a star whose legacy keeps being refreshed by the present. His long-running connection to Squid Game is a perfect example. Even though his screen time as the recruiter is limited compared with the main cast, Netflix still highlights him in official cast and story materials, which says a lot about the weight of his image inside one of the biggest global Korean titles ever made. That is a very specific form of power, the ability to remain one of the most talked-about faces in a phenomenon without even needing to occupy its center for long. What makes Gong Yoo even more difficult to rank is that his current relevance is not resting only on old prestige or the afterglow of earlier masterpieces. New momentum has been building around show business, the upcoming Netflix period drama that pairs him with Song Hye-kyo. Industry coverage in 2025 confirmed the series, and Netflix's 2026 Korean content slate lists the show for release in the fourth quarter of 2026. That matters because it proves Gong Yoo is still being positioned at the center of top-tier projects, not as a nostalgic luxury casting choice, but as a genuine present-day lead whose name still carries major weight. And that is where Gong Yoo becomes very different from the other two. Lee Min-ho feels broader, more openly tied to mass international name recognition. Hyun feels colder, more elite, and more associated with event-scale authority. Gong Yoo feels deeper. His star power is not only about reach or industry scale. It is also about affection, trust, and the sense that when he appears, the project instantly gains seriousness. He is famous, yes, but he is also revered in a way that very few actors manage to become. That kind of prestige, when combined with global recognizability, is one of the hardest forms of celebrity power to match. That is why Gong Yoo belongs so high in this top 3. He represents Korean A-list stardom at its most emotionally enduring, prestigious, globally familiar, and still strong enough to anchor major Netflix attention in the present. He does not need to shout to feel powerful. His name already does the work. So in the end, the real question is not simply which actor is the most handsome, the most beloved, or the most respected. It is which actor most fully embodies what it means to be an A-list Korean male star right now. The combination of fame, influence, industry weight, longevity, and current relevance strong enough to make his name feel bigger than any single project. And when you place Lee Min-ho, Hyun Bin, and Gong Yoo side by side, what becomes clear is that they each dominate a different dimension of power. With Lee Min-ho, the force is scale. He represents the version of Korean stardom that travels the fastest and reaches the widest. Even when a project divides opinion, his visibility remains massive, as seen again in 2025 through When the Stars Gossip and the heavy attention around Omniscient Reader, The Prophecy. That tells us something important. Lee Min-ho's fame is no longer dependent on critical consensus. His name itself is already a global Hallyu event. He is the actor casual international viewers recognize instantly, the face that still symbolizes Korean drama stardom for huge numbers of people around the world. That kind of fame is extremely hard to build, and even harder to maintain. With Gong Yoo, the force is emotional prestige. His power does not feel loud, but it feels deep. He carries the kind of name that instantly adds seriousness and quality to a project. His presence in Squid Game continues to matter far beyond his amount of screen time, and the anticipation around Netflix's show business proves that his relevance is still tied to the present, not just to legacy. What makes Gong Yoo so formidable is that he does not only command respect, he commands affection. Audiences do not simply know him, they hold on to him. That gives his stardom a rare density, where prestige and public feeling work together instead of pulling apart. But when all of these forms of power are compared, Hyun Bin still feels like the strongest answer, because among these 3, he most fully represents the idea of the powerful A-list actor as a complete package. That is the difference that puts him on top. Lee Min-ho may be broader in worldwide Hallyu scale. Gong Yoo may carry a more emotionally revered kind of prestige, but Hyun Bin feels like the actor whose star power is the most concentrated, balanced, and formidable across every category at once. He has longevity. He has elite public image. He has industry authority. He has large-scale project gravity. And most importantly, he still feels fully dominant in the present through titles like Harbin and Made in Korea, the latter launching on Disney Plus and Hulu on December 24, 2025, with enough confidence behind it that a second season was already in production. That is not just relevance. That is power with institutional backing. What makes this top 3 so satisfying is that it shows 3 completely different ways to stand at the summit of Korean male stardom. Lee Min-ho gives us global fame. Gong Yoo gives us prestige and emotional weight. Hyun Bin gives us authority. 3 different kinds of dominance. 3 different ways to remain untouchable. But only one actor who, right now, feels like the most complete expression of Korean A-list power. And that is why, in the end, Hyun Bin stands at the top.